So let's go to the mailbag.
Yes, of course. If you want to ask us a question, do email us healthreport@abc.net.au. And Norman, next week is a special on borderline personality disorder, and we won't have a mailbag. So it's a bumper crop for us today. A couple for you to answer and a couple for me to answer.
Well, let's go to start with you. This comes from Christine. Hi, guys. Avid listener here. I was listening to your segment on ticks and the bad reactions. However, there was no mention of mammalian meat allergy. I was diagnosed 3 years ago and can't eat mammal meats or byproducts, dairy, wheat or carrageenan, Irish moss. I can't even have anti-venom as it's made by horses. The alpha-gal sugar protein found in all these foods are in the tick's saliva, so if I get bitten, I react badly. However, ticks flock to me over any other person around me.
Oh, wow. Christine, thank you so much for your message. And yes, we should have mentioned that. It was something that we weren't able to cover. And yeah, mammalian tick allergy or mammalian meat allergy that's caused by ticks is actually something that was first discovered in Australia by a researcher called Cheryl Van Union. And it's a thing. It's rare, but it's not that rare. It does happen. And while there's not much you can do about it once you've got it, I thought I would at least kind of follow up on this question from Christine by saying, well, yeah, if ticks are flocking to you, then the best thing you can do is protect yourself from getting bitten by ticks. And the best way of preventing tick bites is the usual sorts of things: long sleeve shirts, pants tucked into socks, light coloured clothing, and you can also get insect repellent that contains DEET, and you can even put that you can even get fabrics that are infused with that. So if you're going into places where ticks might be, take those precautions because, yeah, as we heard, they can have pretty severe reactions in some people.
Interesting.
Yeah, and now a question for you, Norman, from Joe, who's asking how many health workers in New South Wales are now at risk because their Pfizer vaccinations were more than 6 months ago. Are these perhaps going to represent new clusters as a sign that immunity is waning?
Well, it's true that the immunisations started in March, April of this year, not just of health workers, some aged care workers, they came a bit later, unfortunately, but aged care residents and healthcare workers in general. So this is an issue. If the Israeli data are representative of Australia, they are starting to deteriorate in terms of their immunity round about now, and I think the federal government is beginning to think about how they're going to be boosted, because they do need to be boosted almost certainly to protect themselves but also to protect others in terms of transmission risk. Remembering that the transmission risk reduction for Delta is probably about 50%, so it's not 100%. The good news is that they are still well covered against severe disease, but the issue does become much more acute as time goes on. So we're coming up to the time this month, next month, the month after, where some sort of booster campaign, rolling booster campaign is going to have to be started.
Yeah, and as Joe says, health workers are a particularly crucial group because not only are they're in environments where they might catch COVID, but they're also dealing with people who might be vulnerable, so they don't want to transmit it either. Well,
that's right. And as New South Wales, it was interesting that you asked about New South Wales, but Victoria is also going to be a problem too, is that the peak in hospital utilisation is going to be in October, hoping that the 70% opening up doesn't create another peak, but let's assume that's it. If you get spread in healthcare workers in hospitals and they're put on furlough, our hospitals are really not going to be able to cope with this surge in October, and then Victoria a little bit later. And Victoria's had some bad episodes of spread in hospitals requiring large numbers of staff to be furloughed, and that's not when the hospitals have been under the COVID strain. Here's one for you, Tegan, from Martin. I have a cat-obsessed wife. I listened attentively to your recent episode that included a short section on toxoplasmosis. It just left me hanging. Tut, Tegan. I understand if someone is severely ill with toxo, they will seek treatment for it. But what is the treatment for all those people who unwittingly have the toxoplasmosis parasite, but at such a low level they're not noticeably ill? And then he compliments you by saying, I enjoy the podcast.
Thanks, Martin. Well, yeah, it is interesting, and part of the reason why it is difficult to treat is because it's super gross and it basically forms cysts in your body where the parasite is kind of enclosed in it, which means it's hard for the immune system to get to. I think what I really took from that conversation with Arjen Sutherland, the researcher, is that it's quite emerging area of research, that we don't really know a lot about how it can harm people. But what we do know about toxoplasmosis, the biggest concern, I think, well, at least the version that I heard, I suppose, as a woman who's had pregnancies, is that if you catch toxo for the first time while you're pregnant, or if you're exposed to that parasite for the first time while you're pregnant, it can harm the unborn baby. Which I assume means that if you've been exposed to it in the past, perhaps you've got that pre-existing